right, roll sound.
Speed.
Roll camera.
Rolling.
Scene 6, take 1.
Ready, settle, and action.
Today, I want to talk about underrated film directors.
Okay, again. Quiet. Roll 'em.
But first, I want to talk a little bit about the word underrated. I think it's a very overused and often misused term, and I'm sure I'm guilty of that myself just by trying to make this video. So maybe, let's say undervalued instead. And even there, I'm probably shooting myself in the foot, because some of these directors have directed Best Picture winners and won Oscars themselves. So what I think I'm going for here is a very subjective use of the terms, because in some cases these directors are underrated, undervalued by casual movie fans. They're not somebody they would be able to name like Spielberg or Tarantino, but have probably seen and enjoyed many of their films. And then there are others who have made huge blockbusters, worked for decades, but don't get the respect they deserve as an artist because maybe they're seen as not much more than a studio lackey. I also don't want to try and rank these directors, because again, it's so subjective. So instead, I'll list them by eras, starting in the 70s and working my way forward. These directors I'm showing now, I also considered for this list, but ultimately didn't make the final cut.
This is the best work we've ever done.
It's a real film, Jack.
It feels good.
First off, we have William Friedkin. Despite making two of the most popular movies of the 70s, The French Connection and The Exorcist, both huge hits with audiences and critics alike, both winning multiple Oscars, Friedkin doesn't often get mentioned in the same breath as his 70s contemporaries, the so-called movie brats, Spielberg, Scorsese, Francis Ford Coppola, George Lucas, and Brian De Palma, probably because he wasn't able to keep up his career in quite the same way. He made two other action masterpieces, The Criminally Underseen Sorcerer. This 1977 film is an absolute clinic on how to build on-screen tension. It's dirty and nasty, and the behind-the-scenes stories must be as crazy as what happens on screen. And To Live and Die in LA, which is one of the best-made action films of the 80s, with some top-notch car chases. 2003's The Hunted is also a pretty great action film. Beyond that, he made a lot of forgettable films, but he should get more credit for directing 3 of the 100 greatest films of all time.
I've been fortunate with a couple of films in my life where I think I knew exactly what I was doing and why, and that isn't always the case. I've made some films I can't even watch. They're so bad. And if I see them, I see, this guy didn't know what the hell he was doing. And that was me.
Another director who started working in the 60s, but really took off in the 70s, is Richard Donner. Again, he's never mentioned in the same breath as the others, but his films have grossed over $2 billion in box office. He's one of those filmmakers I was talking about when I said studio lackey, because he worked on so many hit films without them really feeling personal to him. But he created the model of the modern superhero film with 1978's Superman. He scared the pants off us with The Omen, kickstarting a horror franchise. The Goonies defined a generation of 80s kids. He directed one of my favorite Christmas films in Bill Murray's Scrooged. But what he's probably best known for is the Lethal Weapon series, which starts out as a dark, brooding action film and turns into an audience-pleasing slapstick comedy by the end. He doesn't have an obvious artistic style that stands out and says, this is a Richard Donner film, but almost every film he made was damn solid, well shot, and well acted. His biggest strength seems to be his innate sense for what current audiences wanted to see, changing with the times for 5 decades.
It's invariable that when the day we're supposed to start shooting, the night before, I come down with laryngitis.
Laryngitis?
I always do. I'm serious. I mean, I know it. Everybody now that knows me laughs. I know I got the flu. I can't go in. Let's wrap. Let's not start today. I can't talk. But everybody that knows me will insist that I go to work, and I'll insist I go to work. And when you finally say action for the first time, it all disappears. But it's total panic.
Peter Weir is an Australian director who made some of the best films of the 80s and 90s, but has been making films since the 60s. He made landfall in America with a haunting mystery film Picnic at Hanging Rock. He made an incredibly powerful and personal World War I movie with 1981's Gallipoli, about Australia's involvement in the war. He made nothing but good to great films in the 80s, with The Year of Living Dangerously, Witness, the vastly underrated Mosquito Coast, and his most popular film, the highly celebrated dramedy Dead Poets Society, which was a huge hit with audiences, while also winning Best Screenplay and nominating Robin Williams for Best Actor, himself for Best Director, and Best Film. He made 2 more all-timers with 1998's The Truman Show, which may be Jim Carrey's best film, a film that foretold a lot of things about our society over the past 2 decades.
Who are you? I am the creator of a television show that gives hope and joy and inspiration to millions. Then who am I? You're the star.
And 2003's Master and Commander, which is one of the best on-the-water war films of all time. It's an ultimate dad movie. He made a lot of great films, yet not much name recognition for Peter Weir.
I remember having this conversation, of all people, here with Stanley Kubrick in London. And I said to him, do you find scripts, really just dreadful? And he said, absolutely, yeah. I said, there must be another way to write it. I said, that X'd day, or int night. I thought, who cares? Why is that important? And he agreed completely.
Paul Verhoven is a Dutch director who has been making films in his home country since the 60s and continues to make films today, making him the longest working director on the list. He is best remembered for his work in 80s and 90s genre pictures, known for pushing the limits of sex and violence on the screen, combining both for the biggest hit of his career with the sexual thriller Basic Instinct. But he also made 3 of the best action sci-fi films of the 80s and 90s, with RoboCop, Total Recall, and Starship Troopers. These are 3 of my favorite films of all time, each a twisted, violent look into our future, with incredible action scenes and mind-bending stories. But he may be most notorious for the biggest bomb of his career, with 1995's Showgirls. This X-rated look at the life of a Las Vegas showgirl has gone on to much acclaim as a so bad it's good classic. He moved back to Dutch language films with 2006 Black Book, another sexually charged violent film about a Jewish singer who infiltrates the Nazis, which was nominated for Best Foreign Language Film that year.
That sex is more or less banned from movies, especially in the United States. It's nearly impossible. But sex is all that, it's the most important thing in life.
Moving on to filmmakers who got their start in the 80s, we have Tony Scott, a filmmaker who made some of the biggest films of all time, but also has a very personal style. He was one of the forefathers of shaky cam and fast cuts. Michael Bay owes him a thanks or 2 for his career. Top Gun is without a doubt his best known film, but he made some of the best action films of the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, including Days of Thunder, The Last Boy Scout, Enemy of the State, Man on Fire, and Crimson Tide, and the best Tarantino film not directed by Tarantino, in True Romance, which I would argue is better than some of Tarantino's films. He excelled at getting good performances out of movie stars, working with Tom Cruise, Eddie Murphy, Bruce Willis, Will Smith, and Denzel Washington many, many times. And the rest of his casts are always overflowing with great character actors. He's also undervalued because his older brother, Ridley, is one of the best known and most highly regarded directors of all time.
And I think as a director, making a movie is about falling in love with a movie. You can never anticipate a time when you meet a project and fall in love with a project. It comes your way and I see it and I grab it and I get tunnel vision. And I'm totally preoccupied with it until I've finished it.
Amy Heckerling shot out of the gate with her best film, 1982's Fast Times at Ridgemont High. This film basically set the mold for the next decade plus of what teenage comedies would look like. The cast is an incredible who's who of young movie stars who would go on to define the 80s. It's a nearly perfect film from top to bottom. Absolutely knee-slapping hilarious, while also hitting the pathos of what being a teenager is like. She followed it up with some pretty great comedies, the underseen Michael Keaton mobster spoof film Johnny Dangerously, the often forgotten Vacation between Wally World and Christmas, when the Griswolds went to Europe. I'd put European Vacation right there with the other 2, as an absolutely hysterical and endlessly quotable comedy classic.
Kids.
We know. Big Ben.
Parliament.
She had a big hit writing and directing 1989's Look Who's Talking, spawning 2 sequels. And then she hit the zeitgeist again with 1995's Clueless, redefining teen comedies for the 90s. After that, her film career took kind of an unexplained nosedive, but she's kept up her comedy chops by moving into TV directing.
When you go out and you have something you want to say or a character that you're in love with that you want to, illustrate to the world or something that just some star like John Travolta and how he relates to babies, and you just, are loving all of that. You hope that other people agree with you, but you never know.
If you're a horror fan, you may know his name, but despite writing and directing some of the best horror films of the 80s, he never reached the name recognition of Wes Craven or John Carpenter. I'm talking about Stuart Gordon, who got his start with Reanimator, one of the wildest and most inventive zombie films of all time, based on an H.P. Lovecraft story. Gordon specialized a bit in making Lovecraft adaptations. His next film, 1986's From Beyond, is one of the best, in all its crazy, gooey insanity. 2001's Dagon is another criminally underrated pure Lovecraftian horror film, with a couple accidentally stumbling upon a Spanish fishing town trapped under the power of an ancient sea god. The Pit and the Pendulum is an excellent Edgar Allan Poe adaptation. Dolls is a great creepy doll film, if you're into that kind of thing. And King of the Ants is a brutal look at a young man's life after he decides to become an assassin. A lot of people may look at Gordon's films and see nothing but schlocky 80s horror, but there was a true auteur at work here.
When I was growing up in Chicago, my parents would not allow me to see horror films. Of course, I had to see as many of them as I possibly could. And, they were afraid that they would give me nightmares, and they were right, they did. I would have terrible nightmares.
Catherine Bigelow may be a cheat. She won an Oscar for Best Director for her 2008 war thriller, The Hurt Locker.
There's no other way to describe it. It's the moment of a lifetime.
Which also won Best Picture that year. She followed it up with the almost equally acclaimed war drama Zero Dark 30, an intense inside look at the hunt for Osama bin Laden. Those two films put her on the map for Joe Schmo moviegoer, but she's been making kick-ass action films since the 80s, including my all-time favorite vampire film, Near Dark. A gritty, violent look at these bloodsuckers, not as powerful, sexy monsters, but as desperate drifters barely surviving on the edges of society, with fantastic performances from Bill Paxton and Lance Hendrickson. Blue Steel is a very watchable cop drama starring Jamie Lee Curtis. Point Break is an absolute banger, a top 5 90s action film. Patrick Swayze is electric as one of the most lovable bad guys of all time, Bodhi.
This was never about money for us. It was about us against the system. That system that kills the human spirit. We stand for something. To those dead souls inching along the freeways in their metal coffins, we show them that the human spirit is still alive.
And we've got doe-eyed Keanu Reeves chasing him down with a surfboard in hand. 1995's Strange Days is a wild sci-fi trip, co-written by her ex-husband, James Cameron. So Catherine may not be underrated now, being an Oscar winner and all, but she was for a long time.
I think what's important to me is to look at the human cost. And however that gets interpreted, however that gets refracted, whatever your personal politics or ideology may be, I think what the film does fairly even-handedly is look at the human cost on a daily basis.
Moving on to filmmakers who got their start in the 90s. Richard Linklater isn't underrated so much in his name value, but in the breadth and importance of his career. He kicked off in 1990 with Slacker, a homemade film about a day in the life of an Austin, Texas misfit. This film basically started the 1990s indies film renaissance, inspiring filmmakers like Kevin Smith to take cameras into their own hands. He followed it up with my personal favorite film of his, Dazed and Confused, a warm, comprehensive look at the last days of high school in 1976. It's a damn near perfect film with an incredible 90s cast. The film is relatable for teenagers no matter what era they grew up in.
I'd like to quit thinking of the present, like right now, as some minor, insignificant preamble to something else.
Exactly, man. That's what everybody in this car needs. It's some good old, worthwhile, visceral experience.
His decades-long storytelling approach is extremely unique. The dramatic love trilogy Before Sunrise, Before Sunset, and Before Midnight is an incredible achievement between he and co-writers/stars Ethan Hawke and Julie Delpy, as they follow this couple from falling in love in their early 20s to married with kids in their 40s. And I wouldn't be surprised if we got another installment or two before it's all over. His film Boyhood is an enchanting filmmaking achievement, as he follows the life of a kid and his family in real time over a dozen years, as we watch these actors age over the course of this well-told drama. He's pushed the boundaries of technology with his animated films Waking Life, A Scanner Darkly, and Apollo 10.5, and he's made all-out crowd pleasers like School of Rock. He's been making almost one film a year for the past 3 decades, Among his contemporaries, I'd say only Steven Soderbergh matches his output.
One of the great things about getting to do this is there is a cathartic aspect. You do get to recycle things from your own experience. So that's where I really do work from a pretty specific autobiographical place, at least as a jumping off point.
Lastly, I'll talk about Edgar Wright. This director is pretty well known among film geek circles, but despite being one of the best and most visually exciting filmmakers of his time, his films don't seem to connect with general audiences, and they make less and less money at the box office with each release. His first film, Shaun of the Dead, is probably his best known and most beloved film. This comedic take on the zombie apocalypse is hilarious, and well worth watching over and over again. His Cornetto trilogy of Shaun, Hot Fuzz, and The World's End are all impeccably well-made, high-energy comedic spins on beloved genre stories, co-written and starring Simon Pegg. But my favorite film of his is Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, which is the perfect blend of romantic comedy, rock and roll, comic books, and video games. The film is endlessly inventive with its visual trickery, truly hilarious.
Is Scott here?
You know what? He just left.
And also a relatable young love story. Baby Driver is maybe the best car chase film of the 2000s. I'll take this over every single Fast and the Furious. His latest film, Last Night in Soho, might be his most visually appealing film to date, with some absolutely gorgeous giallo-inspired cinematography, with wild colors and a camera that never stops moving. But it seems to be missing something in its story and characters. Audiences ignored it, and even Edgar Wright fans seem indifferent to it. But it probably deserves a rewatch, and I'm fully confident that he's got another masterpiece or two still in front of him.
Whenever people ask me for advice on how to get started in the industry, the only advice I can give them is to just go out and make their own films. I wouldn't say I'm proud of every single frame in these films because they're, it's really stupid and some of it is really lame, but I made hours and hours of stuff and just tried to kind of learn by my own mistakes.
We'll call it a wrap there. Who did I get right or wrong, and what filmmakers did I miss? If you're still watching this, you can probably list 10 more of your own undervalued directors. And what post-2000s directors should we be talking about more? Post your comment below. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe.